So welcome to another ADA Q&A. Jess Segovia here, ADA Guru, and always a pleasure to work with the public transit professionals here throughout the country. And I've led trainings in many, many states with agencies, small, rural, and very large urban agencies as well. And I think most of you know my background. Began my career with Access Services here in Los Angeles. First, almost 10 years of my career working in ADA paratransit, and then the last 5 years of my public agency career as the ADA compliance manager for Los Angeles Metro. And that was quite a challenge, such a large agency. We had involvement in every aspect of the agency that had an ADA compliance element, including facility accessibility. And we had a staff person who focused on that. And so there are just so many ways that ADA compliance is impacting your agency, whether you know it or not, right? I have coming up here, I think next week, a bus stop accessibility webinar. And so take a look, go to my website, adaguru.co for that. It's .co, not .com. And that could be really helpful. You know, it's important with facility accessibility, bus stop accessibility in particular. It's very important that we understand that we need a program, right? We need to have rankings. At least my recommendation is we have rankings. So maybe we have different types of bus stops depending on the amenities. Is there a bus shelter? So maybe we have, categories 1, 2, and 3. 1 is a sign in the dirt. Maybe 2 is a bus stop at a sidewalk, and maybe category 3 is a bus stop at a sidewalk with a bus shelter. And so we start to track the data, our boarding data, that will help us identify where it would make sense to spend any dollars that we might have on improving bus stops and accessibility, right? So that's very helpful guidance, I hope. And so, yeah, take a look at that webinar if you're interested. We also talk about the actual requirements out of the ADA for things like slope and, curb cuts. And so we do review some technical information, but a lot of it is from the planning and implementation perspective as well. So we have a question here. Information about the former facilities person at LA Metro. They'd like to conduct some site visits. So very interesting. So at LA Metro, the person that handled that, his name is Benjamin Alcazar. And so if you want to email me, I can provide you his contact information and be happy to connect the two of you there. So let's start with if, anyone wants to unmute yourselves and ask a question, I love that. If not, I thought maybe I would bring up the ADA tip that I sent out this week. So let me pull that up if I may. And you can remember that the ADA tip had to do with service animal ID cards. So I had an agency reach out to me and say someone tried to board the bus or the van, and they had an ID card, had the picture of the animal and its name and the owner. And then on the back of it, it had a definition of a service animal that appeared to be different than the definition that we have in public transit. And so my thoughts are that, yes, there are so many different ways approaches to service animals, right? I know of an agency that does not have a service animal policy. Their policy is animals are welcome, and they focus on safety. So they don't differentiate between a service animal and a pet. That's a choice, right? The guidance in the ADA tells us that we can ask 2 questions. Is your animal a service animal required because of a disability? And what task has your animal been trained to perform? So that's the guidance out of the ADA and from the FTA on determining whether an animal is a service animal. There are some complaints that have been investigated by the FTA that you can find online, and one of them has to do with an animal. It was actually a cat, and the rider had a cat in a stroller. And when the bus operator attempted to clear the wheelchair securement, or excuse me, when the operator attempted to ask the questions about a service animal, the rider refused to answer the questions, and therefore the operator concluded that the rider was, or that the animal was a pet, not a service animal. And so this was investigated and it was supported. So that tells us very clearly that people with disabilities using animals, service animals, they do need to answer those questions. They do need to participate in the interaction so that we can get the information that we need. So there's no misunderstanding there, right? Question here, there is a DOJ definition which is different than the DOT. So let's even go deeper in the weeds than that. The DOJ definition, which was actually on the back of this ID card that this person had, stated that a service animal is a dog. Okay, that is a DOJ definition. I'm actually hearing, I haven't pulled it up lately, but the DOJ definition is that service animals are dogs and miniature horses. So if someone wants to clarify that, but it is not what we have in the FTA DOT, right? Which is that service animals, as we have the definition here, any guide dog, signal dog, or other animal individually trained to work or perform tasks for an individual with a disability. So the thing that gets people hung up, or other animal, right? So could it literally be any other animal? Potentially, yes. Now, when I ask people in my trainings who has seen, someone try to bring a giant horse or a cow or a goat, no one has ever said yes, they do that. But there is the possibility that we have some really challenging situations. I have a client in Hawaii, and they had someone try to board with a raccoon. But on this particular island, I don't know if it's all of them, but on this particular island, raccoons, there is a law that says that raccoons are not pets, that they're wild animals. And so obviously the raccoon, or actually maybe this was in St. Louis. Maybe this was in Missouri when I was doing a training there. So anyway, so we have guidance. In Hawaii, snakes are illegal on the big island of Hawaii. And so if anyone tried to board and say that their animal is a service snake, a service animal that is a snake, that animal could be denied service because snakes are illegal on the island. So yes, snakes. There is another complaint that had been filed with the FTA and that the FTA investigated. That was the complaint was filed by another rider on the bus. A person with a disability boarded with a snake. The operator asked the two questions. Is your animal a service animal required because of a disability? What task has the animal been trained to perform? The rider responded appropriately, and the operator determined that the snake was a service animal. Another rider on board filed a complaint and stated that there should not be snakes allowed on board. It is unsafe. The investigation determined that the operator followed the guidance and came to a conclusion and did not see that the snake was creating an unsafe situation, right? A seriously disruptive situation. And so this is the standard that we have. There is another FTA definition of a service animal, but that's for aviation, right? Airlines, which I'm pretty sure that definition is matching the DOJ, which service animal is a dog or maybe or a miniature horse. But that is not the standard of the definition that applies to public transportation. We have to remember that our vehicles, if we are working in public transportation, our vehicles are public space. And so we need to act accordingly, right? So that's a pretty good one. I was appreciative of the agency that sent this question in. And so I also get the question, could we create a service animal identification ID program? And the answer is yes. What could you do? You could create an ID. You could have people maybe fill out a form. They answer the questions on this form. They provide a photo. you create an ID and send it to them. And anytime someone boards with the ID, they show it to the operator and the person gets to board, right? But if someone does not have the ID card, you cannot make the ID card mandatory. If someone does not have the ID card, we simply ask the questions that we have, right? We have a comment here. We created badge backers for all of our operators. It's like a pocket guide. Yes, I love pocket guides. Pocket guides for operators that provide guidance on how to handle things. I could think of a number of issues that we would want and need our operators to be experts at, that we want them to have the information they need at the tip of their fingers, right? Service animals, when it's reasonable to deny service, maybe wheelchair securement, maybe in general, our general assistance requirements, the ways that operators are to provide assistance. Those are just some of the ones that come to mind for me. So I would love to have pocket guides and or decals on our vehicles uh, for all of those types of issues that our operators are dealing with, right? Here's a question. Can an agency require that the animal be licensed and registered to be considered a service animal? So I have recently heard that a transit agency can enforce the local requirement for a license and vaccinations. So if the county of LA, I'm not sure they do, but if the county of LA required that all animals be registered, and in order to be registered, they have to have all their shots, then a transit agency can ask for proof that the animal is meeting the local law, right? And so that might be an ID card showing the license. That could be some little certificate that the county or the city provides to confirm that an animal has indeed met the standard for the license and or vaccinations. And so I was surprised to hear that feedback from the FTA, but yes, we can use that or hold that standard for service animals to board. Is it going to lead to, see, there's so many things we can do. We can have so many policies and we can be very, very strict. But we have to remember the reality of operations if we are overly strict. Okay, so I'm not discouraging you from having strict policies. I have a client that does not allow pets on their vehicles. And so that's challenging for those people that maybe are trying to bring their pet in a carrier to the vet. But this is the policy choice that they have made. There's no requirement that transit agencies transport pets. But this agency is likely going to have maybe more negative interactions over this, right? Or what they could have is they could have people that would normally be traveling with their pet in a carrier because they do not have a pet policy. The people are now going to bring their animal, potentially bring their animal onto their transit vehicles and state that the animal is a service animal. And now that animal is not in an enclosed carrier. So that is actually worse, we could argue, than to have a pet policy and to require that pets be in an enclosed carrier. So the choices that we make, we can be very strict in applying denial of service, right? But that's when the real work begins. Those of you that have taken my trainings know I talk a lot about the real work is after we've made the decision to deny service, right? We have to document it. We need to make sure we are treating the rider fairly and equitably. And so why do we document these things? Because we could be sued and we might have to defend ourselves, defend the decision that has been made. So that's why I talk a lot in my trainings about we need to make our drivers and operators experts at a few things. Number one, experts at providing assistance to people with disabilities, right? In all the ways that they need to, boarding and alighting assistance, wheelchair securement, lap and shoulder belt, etc., etc. We also need to train our operators to very clearly and accurately identify when there is an unsafe situation that exists. And we need them to become experts at describing to dispatch uh, when they are experiencing something. See, dispatch, those of you that are dispatchers, I'm sure you can agree with this. Dispatch can only provide guidance, good guidance, when they have good information provided to them. So I've seen over and over, this especially happens in fixed route bus service for some reason. I think I know why, but where an operator will determine that the animal is unsafe because the dog barked once. And oh, the dog was barking and trying to bite people. And so dispatch will say, okay, go ahead and deny service. Well, if the complaint comes in, and I would pull the audio and video anyway, if I have an operator or a driver calling into dispatch stating that there is an unsafe situation and what they're really wanting is to deny service, I would pull that immediately. I would not wait for the rider to complain because most riders are not going to complain. And so we have to be really careful with this, right? We need our operators to describe without exaggeration what they are experiencing so that dispatch can provide a good, clear, accurate response to determine how to move forward. So there's a question here from Rachel. Is it better to be strict? I tell my drivers to consider if it's worth the time and frustration to argue over whether a well-behaved animal is a service animal or not. In general, I agree with that sentiment, right? We have to pick and choose when we are going to, well, we have to consider what are the consequences of whatever we might be doing. I do feel very strongly that if we have a policy, we should follow it. Okay. So I'm not a fan of letting drivers choose not to inquire about whether an animal is a service animal. I think we have this guidance and it's very helpful and we should use it. Why should we use it? Because if we just let an animal on board without checking if it's a service animal, and then it bites someone, and then we pull the audio and video and we see that the animal was let on board, not in a carrier, as if it was a service animal, but it is not a service animal, and now that we're not sure what that animal is, right? And so we have to be careful with that. So our policies are very, very important. And it's important that if we have a policy that we follow it. And that's why it's so important that we have a policy that is usable, that works in our community, that our drivers understand and will follow. And then we need to make sure, as I talk a lot about, that we have oversight of our drivers and operators, good ongoing oversight to make sure that they are following our policies. Again, from my perspective, what's the point of having a policy if we're not going to use it and enforce it? That's problematic. I also work, as I've shared in the past, as an expert witness in lawsuits, and I've worked representing families who had a loved one that got injured or worse. And when we start pulling information, send me the agency policies and training material, and then the driver and the trainer and the supervisors all get interviewed, right? Depositions. And we look through it all and we have inconsistency. We have maybe a policy that says that the operator will offer the lap and shoulder belt every time. And then we talk to the trainer and the trainer says, yeah, I think I review that in the training. And then we have the driver that will say something like, I don't remember receiving that guidance in the training, right? Inconsistency really hurts us when we are in a position or a situation to have to defend our agency when something goes wrong. So is it better to be very strict? I can't answer that. It's probably policy by policy, but quite frankly, it depends on your community, okay? Um, some agencies just don't struggle with people trying to board with a bunch of crazy animals, right? And creating these unsafe situations. Some communities don't have an issue with that. So they may find that they don't need as strict a service animal policy. Then maybe you're in a large urban area and people are showing up with, four stray dogs and they have all these, other types of animals that they are claiming is a service animal. Maybe in that situation, we do need a strict policy and we need strict policy adherence. And again, policies are the choices that we make that determine how we will provide service. So I'm not a fan, as you know, of cookie cutter policies. If an agency calls me, oh, do you have an example of a good set of policies that we could copy? My answer will always be no. My answer would be no, because policies need to be tailored to your community, to the type of vehicles you have, to the drivers and what their skills are. Agencies tend to, in my experience, get a certain type of employee. Sometimes they can be very technical, but not have good customer service. Some could be very good customer service, but they're not technically oriented. It just depends. If you're in a community where there are a lot of retired people, right? A lot of your drivers could be older adults. They're going to have some challenges that might be consistent in that group. And so our policies need to be reflective of our community, of our services, of our vehicles. I worked in a couple lawsuits actually, where what I found was that the policies that were created for assisting people using wheelchairs was not written for the vehicles that they were actually using. That's one of the challenges I'm going to suggest with these general trainings, maybe like PASS training, etc. I'm not saying PASS training has a role and can be very helpful and provide good information, but the training wasn't designed for your vehicle if you are using a rear loading vehicle, right? I keep getting this feedback from agencies that are struggling in different ways. And I look through their policies and then I ask them about their vehicles, and they just purchased a fleet of rear loading vehicles, and all of their policies and training information is for a side loading van. And so we have to be careful with these things, right? We need to make sure we provide the guidance to use the vehicles that we have in order to ensure safe, compliant delivery of service. So that is very, very important. Instead of maybe having a strict policy, maybe in terms of talking about a strict policy, I think it might be more accurate or helpful to talk about a policy having enough detail. Okay, so I've seen many service animal policies that maybe state or cite the definition of a service animal, right? Any guide dog, signal dog, or other animal, we follow the guidance provided by the ADA. But with that definition, and we have the other part of the ADA that says we can deny service to an animal that is acting unsafe or creating a seriously disruptive environment, right? So we have this guidance from the ADA, but what should our policy say? What does our policy say, though, so that a rider knows what conduct by their animal will lead to them being removed from service? And what does our policy content say with regards to our drivers and operators clearly understanding what unsafe means and for them to enforce? Which is why I like language like the dog is barking incessantly, lunging, nipping, growling, biting, right? Things like that. These are very specific examples of unsafe behavior by an animal. And so I like more specific, detailed policy. I wouldn't consider that to be strict. I would consider that to be having helpful detail, so that riders, when they read that policy, are very clear what we need, and so that drivers and operators know that if animals are not doing these things, which means a dog barking once is not necessarily unsafe, but yet I see that over and over with bus operators that really just don't want the animal on board. Um, then they move to deny service, and then we get a complaint, and then we have to deal with it, right? And then retrain and all of these other things. So yeah, so there are, really a lot of important issues that sort of stem from the service animal. We have a comment here, question, what if the dog is barking to alert its handler to take medicine? Yes, absolutely right. Right? That's why maybe when we ask what task has the animal been trained to perform, oh, it notifies me when it's time to take my medication. Well, that could be helpful information to know, right? So if the dog starts barking, well, it's not necessarily because the animal is acting unsafe and is out of control. Yes, as you suggest, Erica, it could be because the animal is completing its task. Some animals, their job is to get help or to draw attention. Someone has a seizure, they fall to the ground, and the dog starts to bark and draw attention. Sometimes they will even go and sort of nip on someone's, maybe on their ankle or pull their clothes to pull them to the person. So we have to make sure that our drivers have enough knowledge and training to understand certain situations like that. So that's a great question, and you bring up an excellent point there, right? So many different ways that people with disabilities use and benefit from service animals. And so Do we have any other questions about service animals before we sign off today? I do have, starting at 10 o'clock Pacific time, a ADA paratransit eligibility determination webinar. So there is still time to sign up if you want to. You can go to my website, adaguru.co. You can go to workshops and you can sign up for it if you have a little time today. Probably 3 hours, like from 10 to 1 Pacific Standard Time. So any other questions about service animals? Maybe I'll just end on the fact that what we see with many service animal and agencies struggling is sometimes over issues related to allergies. And so we have to make sure that our drivers, operators understand that they may be or will be at some point in close contact or close proximity to a service animal. And so we need to find out about their allergies like during the hiring process, right? It's a part of, let's consider it to be a part of their fit for duty requirements. And so I'm not a fan of a practice where a supervisor will provide an HR accommodation to a driver to allow them to deny service to anyone trying to board with a dog because the driver is allergic to dogs. I think that that is a straight violation of the ADA. Those are my thoughts, my interpretation. I also understand the transit manager that if they lose another driver, they're going to lose 25% of their capacity to provide trips, and they don't want to do that. And so they provide the accommodation. I get that. I'm just not sure. I don't feel like that is consistent with the ADA, that we need to ensure that people with disabilities have full access to use the services that we provide. So, well, as always, a pleasure to work with you all, and I appreciate the comments. Those of you that contributed to the comments, I do want to share once again that I am doing a training in Hawaii. I'm calling it Training in Paradise. This is coming up in October, and I would love to get uh, all of your participation. And so you can see here October 7, 8, and 9, a 3-day training. I'm going to help you become even a better, more effective ADA compliance expert. So you can find information on my website. Did get our first registration a couple days ago, so that's very exciting. And we're probably going to limit it to 50 people. So don't wait too long. I'm here. Please always consider me a resource for your ADA compliance needs and just in general, all of your programs and efforts to assist people with disabilities. And as always, have a wonderful and safe day and reach out to me via email. You can email me info@adaguru.co